Doing a DD today on MindMed. And I was like, what can I do for my intro? No, I'm not gonna make some hallucination joke or psychedelic joke or bring back some song from the 60s or 70s. I'm not gonna do that for attention. I'm above that. Hey everybody, Walrus here from Walrus Street, bringing you a DD today on MindMed. Just a reminder, I am not a financial professional. All information in this video is for entertainment purposes only. It's happening, finally. I've had a lot of people asking me about this one basically since I started my channel. MindMed is a company that creates psychedelic-inspired medicines for novel treatments for existing problems like ADHD, anxiety, addiction. Incredibly useful, incredibly interesting, because most of the other treatments for those conditions are medications that have an incredible amount of side effects, and for the most part, psychedelics have very minimal side effects, if any. I've been having people request this video since I started my channel. MindMed started being traded OTC back in September of last year, but I don't cover OTC stocks here because they're so easily manipulated. That being said, finally, we're getting listed on the Nasdaq on Tuesday, April 27th, which in my mind gives me the green light to clear this. So before everybody rushes in and buys this and doesn't understand what they're buying, I want to cover it in a DD right now in the best way that I know how, give you guys research into the market, into the product, into the possibilities, into the competition, into the company, into the TAM. Everything is going to be included here. It's a little bit long, but watch it all the way through and you'll feel like an expert on the company. Let's begin. Before we get started, there is a very interesting kind of resource for MindMed. It's got its own subreddit already, our MindMed Investors Club. Now, ordinarily, I wouldn't really list a subreddit as research, but as we're going to see at the end of the video, MindMed is an incredibly retail-driven stock. We'll look at the breakdown of holders, and there's really no institutional holders to speak of. So this is a retail-driven stock, so using a resource like Reddit is actually not terrible for sharing information, dissemination of information. Plus, these guys got some real memes on here. I mean, seriously, like every day, there's like 10 new memes. A couple of them are actually funny. Let's get onto their actual website. This is it. They have the coolest logo up here in the corner, the brain with the M in the middle, MindMed. They're focusing on breakthrough mental healing. We help patients unlock the healing power of the mind through psychedelic-inspired medicines and experiential therapies. It's important to say psychedelic inspired. Now, some of the products they're working with are derivatives of psychedelics, of substances that are currently classified as illicit. So we're creating a new tool set for mental health and addiction. Solving for mental illness and addiction requires a novel approach. I can agree with that. What we're doing for the most part doesn't work. On this channel, we've actually covered ACRX and BDSI. We've covered products like Dysuvia, like Belbuca, and these are fantastic pain relieving products, but they're just replacing opioids with a slightly less addictive form of opioids. And shocker, less addictive is still slightly addictive. Now, this isn't a shot at ACRX and BDSI. I like those investments, but MindMed is offering something different, something completely novel. An opioid is an opioid is an opioid. It's like if your wife asks you if you want to adopt a cat and you say no, so you compromise and get a kitten. Guess what? You still got a cat. If you're addicted to opioids and you're given opioids to stop your opioid addiction, like Narcan, which is naloxone, which is another opioid, is it really solving the problem as effectively as it could be? I don't know. So let's check out some psychedelics. Worth noting, they have a lot in their pipeline. LSD experiential therapy for anxiety called Project Lucy, 18MC, which is for substance use disorders. This is for breaking addiction. LSD microdosing for adult ADHD. And then they have MindMed Discover, which are R&D collaborations with academic institutions, mostly in Europe, for LSD assisted therapy, cluster headaches, multiple ongoing or completed on LSD, MDMA, DMT, psilocybin. And you could see all of these are not late stage, but they're past early stage. They're all beyond phase 1, and a couple of them are wrapping phase 2A, but we've not started phase 2B or phase 3. This is an important note. It's important to be realistic here. If you invest in MindMed, you're investing in a clinical stage company. This is a pre-revenue company. So you're not going to see any returns on your investment realistically for years. we're probably looking at 5 to 10 years, depending on how fast a couple of these phase 2As get pushed through to 2B and phase 3, and even then get granted approval. I mean, I think 5 years here is actually a pretty aggressive prediction for revenue. A lot of stuff that I'm seeing online is like 5 to 10 years. It doesn't really matter. The point is, if you're investing in MindMed, you're investing in something that's not going to be generating revenue for years, and you need to be aware of that fact. I think it's important to understand the history of psychedelic drugs and why this is even noteworthy to talk about a clinical stage company. So this is a cool dissertation. I'm going to link this below just because I actually thought it was a really fun read. This is from University of Cambridge back in 2007. Really cool presentation, like 40 pages, talks about the history of psychedelic drugs in medicine. We know that psychedelics have been used for a long time. Magic mushrooms, LSD, psilocybin, MDMA. It's been used for a long time, but if we go back to the earliest psychedelics, a lot of them are mushroom-based, obviously natural. They talk about some of the cultures in here that use them for the past 5,000 years, Native American cultures, early Mexican cultures, and then it talks about Western science using it, mescaline, peyote, and it kind of gets into like the 1950s when Western medicine started experimenting with it academically. The idea that psychedelic drugs can have a beneficial impact medically isn't really a new one. Like I showed you in that history dissertation, we've been experimenting medically, depending on how you define it, at least since the 1950s and possibly even earlier than that. So what happened here? Why did it stop? For a few decades between 1950 and 1980, unofficial research was compiled on a variety of drugs and therapeutic approaches, most centered on the belief that certain drugs could improve insightfulness, set aside biases, and improve communication. But when these studies involved illicit substances, the studies were undoubtedly hindered and most failed. So why were these substances illicit? Well, we have to go back to Mr. Watergate himself, Richard Nixon. In 1971, declared a war on drugs, which, pretty safe to say at this point, has been an abject failure. This war on drugs was a political power move on many social issues that I don't really want to talk about in this video, but it gets pretty ugly and racist and classist and terrible. So you can read about that on your own. But simply, he dramatically increased the size and presence of federal drug control agencies and pushed through measures such as mandatory sentencing and no-knock warrants. This war on drugs saw many substances classified as illicit drugs, including marijuana, LSD, MDMA, cocaine, whatever, all of that. It ended up going on as kind of a political power play for the decades that came after that, with different US presidents approaching the war on drugs differently. People were afraid that their kids were becoming addicted, you know, marijuana is a gateway drug, that sort of thing, and people were going to jail for all of that. And the war of drugs started to fizzle out probably towards the end of George Bush Jr.'s presidency, prior to President Obama taking office. And since then, we've had politicians openly admitting to having experimented with drugs. Culturally, when your politicians start to admit to have taken drugs, like Bloomberg admitted it, Obama admitted it, when that starts to happen, it kind of normalizes things when the lawmakers are like, no, I tried it. So this is the backdrop. Psychedelics were classified and lumped in as illicit substances in that war on drugs. MindMed creates psychedelic-inspired medicines. Their two big ones are 18MC and Microdose LSD. We are pioneering medicines that have the potential to maintain the therapeutic benefits of psychedelics without the hallucinogenic side effects. MindMed is actually working on types of psychedelics or psychedelic derivatives that are not going to make people hallucinate. Now, they are working on therapies with hallucinogenic psychedelics, but as far as treatments, they're working on non-hallucinogenic psychedelics. 18MC and Microdose LSD are two of these, derived from psychedelics, prescribed by a doctor, picked up at a pharmacy. That's their goal. Now, we're going to talk about the TAM in a moment, but let's just say it's big. So the first one is 18MC. I want you guys to remember this. Received $6.8 million in funding from the NIH's National Institute on Drug Abuse. Remember, NIH. We're going to come back to that. 18MC is the next-gen version of Ibogaine. Ibogaine is a Schedule I substance extracted from the West Africa iboga shrub with anti-addictive properties, but it has the potential to induce heart attacks. Addiction, bad. Heart attacks, probably worse, because they kill you right away. Science. Our solution: scientists and chemists have invented a better version of Ibogaine, a derivative called 18MC, and it could be used for treating addiction. Cool, great. For the other one, the LSD microdoses, Generation Adderall has grown up. That's really cute. Adderall is the primary treatment for ADHD. We've got 10 million adults suffering in the US from ADHD. 10.9% of adults with ADHD are receiving treatment. ADHD has increased by 123% since 2007. I don't think that ADHD is actually like spreading virulently. Obviously it's not contagious, but physicians are getting better at diagnosing it. So that's probably why the percent is increasing here. Microdosing LSD refers to smaller non-hallucinogenic doses of LSD, and they have medicinal properties that address the illness without requiring that hallucinogenic dose. So extensive anecdotal evidence suggests microdosing psilocybin and LSD may increase focus, increase creativity, decrease anxiety, and improve mood. Worth noting, of course, extensive anecdotal evidence. A lot of the studies that are done to this point on LSD are non-clinical, or are clinical but have a really small N, or are anecdotally gathered qualitative studies. So MindMed is kind of pioneering this as they go along, which is both good and bad. Good because obviously they're the first mover, best pure play in the area. Bad because what if there's a reason nobody else has really looked into this? So just worth considering. For ADHD, this is from the CDC, children ADHD, millions of US children have been diagnosed with ADHD. Yes, I know I have a global audience, but CDC's American. I'm sure ADHD diagnosis is about the same all around the world. 9.4% of children are diagnosed with ADHD. That's almost 10%. That is crazy. It's increased over time, but in 2016 it did pull back a little bit, showing me that this isn't actually being overdiagnosed anymore. Physicians really know what they're looking for, and they're really selective about the ADHD diagnoses. Also, many children with ADHD also have other mental, emotional behavior disorders, which is one of the reasons that psychedelics are intriguing with MindMed, because they could be used to treat other behavioral conditions. Adult ADHD, there's no statistics on the CDC website, but it's estimated that 33 to 66% of children with ADHD will continue to have significant ADHD-related symptoms persisting into adulthood, resulting in significant impact on education, employment, and interpersonal relationships. So do the math here. If 10% of kids have ADHD, that means 3 to 7 of those kids are carrying their ADHD into adulthood. So are the existing treatment methods really even working? LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, also known as acid, is a hallucinogenic drug. Effects include altered thoughts, feelings, and awareness of one's surroundings. Many users have visual or auditory hallucinations, dilated pupils, increased blood pressure, increased body temperature are typical. Effects typically begin with a half an hour and can last up to 20 hours. It's used mainly as a recreational drug or for spiritual reasons. This is where the misunderstandings about LSD come in. LSD does not appear to be addictive. Its frequent use can cause acute tolerance, requiring much larger doses to feel an effect. Adverse psychiatric reactions are possible, such as anxiety, paranoia, and delusions. As far as adverse effects, there's not many significant ones. It could trigger panic attacks. It does lead to suggestibility, which the CIA and DoD experimented on LSD as a truth serum, and that research was okay, but the rest of the medical stuff was blocked for years. Cool. Flashbacks are a reported phenomenon where the individual experiences an episode of some of LSD's subjective effects after it's worn off, months or years after use, so that's negative. There's no indication it causes cancer. Remember I said the NIH was funding one of their things? The NIH states that LSD is addictive, while most other sources state it is not. I don't like this one bit. MindMed accepted money from the NIH, $6.8 million, for the development of its 18MC product, despite the fact that the NIH is one of the largest health research organizations in the world, and also one of the only ones stating that LSD is addictive. So this is kind of like making a deal with the devil from their perspective as a company, where they're accepting money from a very influential organization that also happens to say the main product of their other drugs is addictive. That seems a little short-sighted for management from my perspective, but I guess maybe they know something I don't. Now, since LSD was first synthesized, many experiments have demonstrated its efficacy in treating addiction in psychotherapeutic settings. Now, this is a meta-analysis of studies from 66 and 70 showing that 59% decreased alcohol consumption compared to 38% when they didn't take the drug. So it's effective at treating addiction. How did this happen? The short-term effects from taking psychedelics are known to decrease impulsivity and improve mood by down-regulating the serotonin system. In the body, the serotonin system is responsible for, among many other things, mood. So if it's down-regulating the serotonin system, it's kind of causing serotonin levels to spike less and even out. This decreases the compulsivity that's often associated with addiction in manic episodes or in overconsumption episodes. As brain imaging techniques have shown, this downregulation only lasts for about a week, making it unlikely to account for long-term changes. Thus, it's been suggested that any long-term changes in the drug may cause neuronal changes that essentially cause a remodeling of the brain that unlearns addiction patterns. So right now, with behavioral issues, there's a combination of drugs plus CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, used, and that CBT kind of teaches people to unlearn mental behaviors and learn new ones, like to understand why they're happening, to learn new ones. So what MindMed is doing is using LSD microdosing plus recommending CBT for people to break their addiction. It's just a different approach. This is from Scientific American. This is another anecdotal study. Do microdoses of LSD change your mind? Called a productivity hack, popular among Silicon Valley engineers and business leaders. Microdosers take regular small doses of LSD or magic mushrooms. They don't experience hallucinatory trips, but they get a jolt in creativity and focus that can elevate work performance, help relationships, and generally improve a stressful and demanding daily life. Jolt of focus, possibly used to treat ADHD. But grain of salt, it's been impossible to separate truth from hype. That's because until recently, microdoses haven't been tested in placebo-controlled trials, which is something that MindMed is working on. Now, anxiety is another one that is really broad, hard to classify, hard to put a number on, as opposed to ADHD. Anxiety is an emotion characterized by an unpleasant state of inner turmoil, often accompanied by nervous behavior, such as pacing back and forth, somatic complaints, and rumination, and includes subjectively unpleasant feelings of dread over anticipated events. For severe cases of anxiety and other mental disorders linked to anxiety, benzodiazepines are typically prescribed. From personal experience, I can say benzos suck. Being on benzos makes you sleepy. It puts you in this permanent state of brain fog where you really can't think. And if you're on other drugs on top of the benzos, it just amplifies the negative side effects of the benzos. So for treating something like anxiety, I fully support the idea of MindMed, of using a psychedelic microdosed as opposed to any of the existing clinical options. Now, that brings me to the 4 questions that I like to answer before investing in something. Number 1, who's in charge? Number 2, what's the product? Number 3, what are the financials? Number 4, who else is involved? A couple of these questions are much shorter than usual today. Number 1, who's in charge? I think one of the most interesting people here, here's the CEO, J.R. Ron. He is one of the co-founders, and I love it when a co-founder is still involved in the company. But Dan Carlin here, the chief medical officer, he built and led clinical informatics and regulatory strategy for Pfizer's Digital Medicine and Innovation Research Lab, and he also served as the global clinical lead for psychiatric clinical components at Pfizer. We all know that Pfizer is one of the largest drug pharmaceutical companies in the world, so this guy is bringing actual world-class psychiatric drug leadership experience into MindMed. This is a good person to have as your CMO. Now, if you scroll through, there's a ton of doctors. Everybody looks really wonderfully qualified, albeit maybe not a lot of experience in terms of years as other companies, but they do have a lot more personnel on board. Also interesting, Stephen Hurst, the co-founder, Scott Freeman, co-founder, Leonard Latchman, co-founder. We have 4 co-founders still involved with the company. This is always a good sign when the co-founders stick out the lean years with the company and they don't bail. Question number 2, what's the product? We've already talked about it quite a bit. Now, this is their investor presentation. I'm also going to link this one below the video if you're interested in checking this out. On my videos, I like talking about the TAM, the total addressable market, and the SAM, the serviceable addressable market. But with MindMed, it's tough because it is so huge, and because disorders like anxiety are typically underdiagnosed. Many people with anxiety don't really even go to the doctor. They just deal with it. If there was an inexpensive treatment that they can get, actually I'm pretty sure that more people would go to the doctor with their anxiety issues. So it's hard to estimate the TAM and the SAM for this. All we know is that it's big. So 4.7 billion global anxiety drug sales, 9.5 billion global ADHD drug sales, 5.8 billion global anti-addiction drug sales, 9.6 billion global annual depression drug sales. I can't do math, but that's a lot of billions. Mental health, the $16 trillion elephant in the room. I don't really think this is the TAM. The TAM was more so on the previous slide, but this shows the fiscal impact of mental disorders. Global mental health cost expected to total $16 trillion through 2030. Anxiety, 284 million sufferers, 1 trillion per year in lost productivity, 300 million opioid prescriptions in the US, 2.5 trillion cost of the opioid epidemic, ADHD, 16 million adult sufferers in the US, 194 billion in lost productivity. From a business perspective, I love that they include this in the slideshow here because sometimes it's easy to be callous towards other people's problems when you don't actually understand them, but everybody understands numbers and dollars. So when we see a number like $16 trillion in lost global productivity for the economy, that's impactful. This is their product. Non-hallucinogenic, LSD microdosing for ADHD, 18-MC for addiction, and then hallucinogenic. Hallucinogenic would be like the full LSD. This is LSD experiential therapy for anxiety, LSD experiential for cluster headaches. For these, a high dose or experiential dose of psychedelics are used, and it's overseen by a therapist or doctor. So it's not like they give you a high dose of LSD and send you on your way to go trip on your own. They observe you in a clinical setting while you're on your trip. So it's not really a trip. It's more like a comfortable stay on a couch with a blindfold and somebody watching you. Definitely not creepy. Not creepy at all. MindMed acquired phase 2 trial, now advancing as phase 2B with the FDA, using phase 2 trial to jumpstart a potential phase 2B LSD trial for anxiety disorder, estimated Q4 2021. This is a potential catalyst, Q4 2021, for a phase 2B trial beginning. Not an ending, beginning. For the LSD microdosing, they're on a phase 2A clinical trial. 18MC, we've got end of phase 2A, start of phase 2B by Q3 2023, NDA submission by 2025. That's why I'm saying, we're looking at like 5+ years before there's even revenue generation for this company. MindMed announces the publication of personalized MDMA dosing. This was just at the beginning of April. Study took place at the University Hospital Basel in Switzerland. This just shows that they can tailor MDMA doses to each individual subject. This study must have had a really big N because they have it narrowed down to like gender and body weight, even certain DNA markers. This isn't anecdotal science anymore of the 1950s. This is legitimate clinical lab science that's going on. Question number 3, what are the financials? Here's our stock chart right here. I zoomed it out just to 5 days because we can see this big jump up on Friday pre-market. So we were at like $2.13 and we jumped all the way up to $3.52. You might be wondering, why did this happen? Why didn't Walrus tell us about this before? Well, because we didn't know this was coming. MindMed applied to be uplisted to the Nasdaq, but we didn't know when the application was going to be granted. It was granted on Friday. So trading is expected to begin Tuesday, April 27th, and it's going to be traded under the symbol MNMD. Previously, it was traded OTC as MMEDF. Now it's going to be MNMD. MindMed announced a filing of preliminary base shelf prospectus and F10 with the SEC under MJDS. This means they're going to be diluting their shares significantly. This happened back on March 31st. For this shelf offering, the company has 25 months to offer 500 million Canadian dollars worth of shares. When you think about their already high number of shares floating and shares outstanding, this starts to get a little bit ridiculous. Now, I understand why the company's doing the dilution. They don't have revenue, they need the money, but this is a bit of a red flag to me because this is a significant dilution of like 50%, depending on how fast they do this, if they do it, but I mean, they probably are. So I don't really like this move, but it is necessary for a pre-revenue clinical stage company. Now, if we go to their earnings report, this is from March 30th, year-end results. It's not really that important. Their current cash balance was 161 million US, 203 million Canadian to support drug development. Total assets were 85.6 million, 80 million cash on hand. Their net and comprehensive loss was 35 million for the year end. These earnings reports for pre-revenue companies are always a little boring. It's more so just giving status updates of the company because there's nothing to report for earnings. So shocker, they're losing money. Yeah, we knew that. Okay, cool. And if we look at the chart here, here, we could go back, we could see they started trading initially back in September at 51 cents. They reached a high in December of $5, got pretty close to that again here in February. And then we had a bit of a rundown here before this gap up on the Nasdaq uplisting. For this one, I actually wanted to go to Simply Wall Street a little bit since I didn't like the formats anywhere else. Financial Health is good. They've got a lot of money right now, but everything else is pretty low on their snowflake. Financial Health, the company does have a pretty strong financial position as long as the investments keep coming in. Right now, they have about 81 million in assets and only 2.3 million in liabilities. Balance sheet looks really solid, mostly equity, sufficient cash runway. That brings us to question number 4, who else is involved? If we look at the ownership breakdown for this, private companies, it's 0.003%, institutions 0.06%, individual insiders 6.6%, and the general public 93.3%. So the general public already holds 318 million shares of this company. The company's talking about diluting another 140 million-ish shares. Now the company's dilution, because it's going to be happening over 25 months, because the price is going to be very volatile, obviously it's probably not going to be 140 million, but it's definitely going to be over 100 million. Moderately concerning, recent insider transactions, we haven't had buys since back in May and December. Since then, the CEO has been selling off a lot of shares. He has actually sold off about 56% of his shares, and he's currently sitting now at about 4.5 million. I don't pretend to know the motivations when insiders sell off shares. He's a founder of this company. He's put a lot into it. He's put his own money into this, I'm sure, and he wants a return on his investment. Selling off shares is perfectly fine for that. But you have to admit the optics are a little bit weird. Selling off the shares when you know that you've applied to the Nasdaq to get uplisted. Unless I'm missing something, this just looks a little strange. Not necessarily a red flag because everybody's free to do with their money what they want. But like I said, the CEO, co-founder selling off shares at this point, a little weird. Let's do a SWOT analysis really quickly. I like to do these on these stocks: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Strengths, this is a first mover pure play. There's no other company purely focused on psychedelics and focused on treating what this company is going to be treating. I say first mover with kind of like air quotes though, because there's no actual product yet. Also, with the amount of retail investors, this is social media hype bait right here. This is going to be one of those stocks that's going to be talked about a lot on StockTwits, on Twitter, on Reddit, and you're going to see a lot of big moves in this over time. Also, we're in a drug-friendly generation. You know, the war on drugs effectively ended with Bush Jr.'s administration. Trump kind of brought it back, but that was only a one-term presidency. So we've got a whole generation of new investors coming up that are accustomed to thinking of drugs in a more positive light. The company has an extensive pipeline with diverse applications. Also, psychedelics have minimal side effects reported, except for the NIH saying they're addictive. Weaknesses. This is a clinical stage company with all of the clinical stage problems, including no revenue, no income. I don't need to say more about that. We've seen these companies before. The company has already diluted its shares, and it's filed a huge shelf to monstrously dilute its shares even more by something like 30+%. Because all of its pipeline substances are currently classified as being illicit substances or derivations of said illicit substances, if the FDA decides to block its first product, then there's a possibility here where the rest of the products are basically screwed and they're going to have FDA hurdle after hurdle after hurdle to jump. So this is a very kind of dangerous game that they're playing, with everything being based on illicit substances. Opportunities? The TAM is insane. Mental health and the treatment thereof and the existing treatments, I mean, we're in like tens of billions of dollars for that. And if you look at the mental health that's probably not diagnosed, the mental health issues, it goes well beyond that. The possible first mover advantage is going to be another really big opportunity where people who want to get into psychedelics and investing are going to be looking at this company first. This is a completely new treatment paradigm. There's nothing like it. So it's going to be the source of discussion. When people talk about EVs, they talk about Tesla. When people talk about psychedelics, they're going to be talking about MindMed. Also, there's international collaboration here. We've got US, Canada, Europe, all coming together for this. A lot of the research being done in Europe. Even if it's got a problem being legalized in the US, chances are it gets legalized in Canada and Europe, so there's still going to be sales at some point in some place. Threats. Insider selling looks bad. I can't spin it any other way. It looks bad when the CEO and co-founder sells 56% of their shares. That threat remains a threat because anybody who investigates the company is going to see that really quickly. I uncovered that in like 30 minutes of research. Legal hurdles. Don't really have to say more. It's classified as an illicit substance. LSD, MDMA, psilocybin. It's tough. There's legal hurdles to overcome here. And time. People's money might be better invested elsewhere. This is a company that could 10x, it could 50x, it could make some ridiculous multiple because it's a first mover. I'm not even going to speculate. But the reality is that it's not going to be generating income for years. So what's the difference if you sink your money into this at $3, $4, $5 a share now, and the share price stays the same, or dilution kicks in and you end up losing money, and it's around this price, it's a penny stock for the next 5 years before jumping up. This is a company that many people might rather just keep on their radar. If it's got the potential to 10x, 20x, 30x, what's the difference if you get in at $5 or you get in at $15? So what's my plan? I might buy some shares on Tuesday just to flip in the short term off the hype, but I'm also very realistic about this company, and I think this is going to be a long-term hold. I don't want to hold it personally for years without revenue, but I do foresee myself getting in and out of positions in this company over time. Because their pipeline is so extensive, they're going to have a lot of clinical pops through the FDA approvals for different stages. I think this is a great product. I think this is a really cool company. I'm very excited about it, but I don't think personally this is the greatest investment for me. Keep in mind, I have a lot of my portfolio in pharmaceuticals already. So I'm going to be getting in and out of this trading over the years, but probably not exclusively holding. I like the company. I like the product. It's cool. I feel positive about it overall, just maybe not the greatest investment right now for me personally. As always, I want to thank you guys for checking out the video today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're new to investing and you want to support the channel, please check out my Webull referral link below the video. If you sign up for a new account, deposit $100, you get a free stock, I get a free stock. Everybody wins. Because I'm partnered with Webull, for the month of April, they're doing a promotion where I get a free stock worth $60 or higher. Thank you in advance. If you enjoyed the video today, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to be alerted to all my content as soon as it goes live, make sure you hit that notification bell. All right, everybody, thanks a lot.